Mark. So guess what landed on my desk this week? News about a quantum chip from, wait for it, Amazon?
Oh my gosh, Jenny, I saw that. The Ocelot chip? Man, I've been diving deep into that research. It's something else. Really something else.
I know, right? Amazon is pushing into quantum computing, which is fascinating by itself. But the headlines are all about this error correction thing. Up to 90% reduction? That sounds considerable?
Considerable is a fair word, yeah. In quantum computing, errors feel like the primary obstacle. Qubits are so delicate, even the slightest disturbance can mess them up. Errors creep in constantly. So having a way to knock down that error rate so significantly, and the overhead you need just for error correction, reducing it by 90%, that really opens things up.
Think of it like, trying to have a really important conversation in a room filled with distracting noise. Error correction is like trying to shout precisely what you mean over all that din. If you can cut that noise by 90%, your conversation gets much clearer and more accurate.
Okay, that analogy helps make sense of it. So this noise, these errors, they just mess up the computation entirely?
Precisely. A single error can spread and ruin the whole process. That's why error correction is just so critical for building a fault-tolerant quantum computer. One that can actually do reliable, complex calculations. Amazon's doing this with something they call Cat Qubits.
Cat Qubits? Are they perhaps related to Schrödinger?
Chuckles. You got it. Not fluffy, sadly. The name comes from Schrödinger's cat, that famous thought experiment where the cat is in a superposition of being both alive and dead at the same time. Cat qubits encode information in a similar way, across different states simultaneously. The intriguing part here is how they handle errors, especially bit flip errors.
Bit flip errors. Is that like a traditional computer flipping a 0 to a 1, or a 1 to a 0?
Pretty much. In quantum computing, it's similar, but for a qubit and its quantum state. The way these cat qubits are designed, it makes them naturally robust against those bit flip errors. It's kind of built into their fundamental structure, using something called bosonic codes. They even mentioned managing bit flip times down to approximately 1 second, and phase flip times of around 20 microseconds. That might sound relatively short, but in the quantum realm, a second without a bit flip is quite stable.
Okay, so fewer error-prone qubits mean less error correction needed, which is where that 90% reduction comes from. And it's partly because of this clever way of designing the qubit itself. What about how they're actually building this thing? I read something about stacking them?
Yeah, the architecture.
This is another challenge in quantum computing: scaling. How do you build bigger, more powerful quantum computers from these remarkably sensitive qubits? A lot of approaches use complex monolithic chips, which can be challenging to manufacture at scale. Amazon, working with Caltech on this, is using a stacked chip design.
Stacked? Like building blocks for quantum chips?
That's a helpful way to think about it. Consider how modern computer chips are made. They often involve stacking layers. Applying that concept to superconducting quantum chips simplifies the fabrication process. It makes it easier to connect qubits and construct larger, more complex systems. It's an approach aimed at creating more easily manufacturable, scalable hardware.
That seems sensible. It sounds like they're addressing some core obstacles in a thoughtful way. How does this approach compare to what we're seeing from other major players, like Microsoft with their Majorana qubits, or Google with their superconducting ones?
That's the key question, isn't it? Microsoft's Majorana path is topological, aiming for inherent fault tolerance through exotic particles. It's a different route altogether, and quite complex to achieve. Google's been focused on superconducting qubits, a more established approach in terms of qubit numbers, but they still face error rates that require substantial error correction overhead, often using methods like surface codes.
So it's like everyone's pursuing the same goal, but taking different paths?
A bit like that, yeah. Amazon's path with Ocelot is focusing on hardware-efficient error correction right at the qubit level with these cat qubits, aiming to reduce the times need for extensive error correction layers from the outset. It could potentially make more physical qubits available for the actual calculation. Each approach has its advantages and disadvantages, and honestly, we don't know yet which one will lead us to a truly fault-tolerant, useful quantum computer first.
It does feel like every few months, there's news of another advancement. Oscar Painter and Fernando Brandao over at AWS Quantum were quoted saying, "Ocelot unlocks hardware-efficient scaling essential for commercial viability." That's a strong statement.
It is a strong statement. And they're the folks who would understand the nuances. Painter is a significant figure in quantum optics and mechanics. Brandau is a prominent expert in quantum computation theory. Their involvement highlights the seriousness of this endeavor. It's not just a marketing headline.
So if this proves successful, what could we actually do with it? Beyond giving theoretical physicists more topics to debate?
Chuckles. Fair point. The main areas that get discussed are places where current computers really struggle. Drug discovery, for instance. Simulating molecular interactions precisely is incredibly demanding on computational resources. A powerful quantum computer could potentially do that much faster, leading to the development of new medicines.
That could have a substantial impact.
And cryptography is another. While it could pose a challenge to some current encryption methods, quantum computers also open the door to new, highly secure quantum encryption optimization problems as well. Think about logistics, financial modeling, even designing better materials. Problems that are practically intractable for even the most powerful classical supercomputers become potentially solvable.
Okay, so the potential is significant, even if these applications are still some distance away. What are Amazon's next steps with this? Are we likely to see this in the cloud soon?
The research suggests they aim to continue scaling this architecture using the stacked silicon approach. This Ocelot is a prototype, a vital step. Getting it into the cloud for researchers and businesses to experiment with is certainly the goal, driving towards larger systems. But the challenges are still present. Maintaining those long coherence times I mentioned, controlling error rates across increasingly complex systems. The engineering is involved.
So, encouraging progress, considerable potential, but still a journey ahead.
Precisely. It's a step forward, a notable one demonstrating a promising direction with these Cat Qubits and scalable architecture. It does add another interesting layer to the quantum computing landscape.
It certainly keeps things interesting. Thanks for explaining that, Mark.
Anytime, Jenny. It's just quantum computing. Lots to talk about.